For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4550.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 190, H.R. 4550, a bill to reauthorize the United States Grain Standards Act and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, and the gentlewoman from Kansas, Ms. Davids, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, without objection, pursuant to the rule, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield to myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak on behalf of the United States Grain Standards Act, a piece of legislation that is more than 100 years old and plays a vital role in preserving safety, quality, and a standard of excellence for the American grain industry. If we want America to maintain its status as the safest, most abundant grain supply in the world, reauthorization of this act before several of its key provisions expire at the end of September is absolutely essential. It was originally passed in 1916, the United States Grain Standards Act gives the federal government the authority to set official marketing standards for grains and oilseeds. It also provides a framework for inspection and weighing procedures. Because of the Grain Standards Act, the American grain industry has developed an enduring reputation for consistency and quality in the global market. This vital toll plays a critical role in reinforcing the strength of our agriculture supply chain. It ensures that farmers, whether they grow corn, sorghum, soybeans, or any other grain, receive a fair price that reflects the quality of their crop. It allows buyers of U.S. grain to feel confident in the safety and quality of the products they need. The Grain Standards Act also supports U.S. trade, a crucial part of the American farm economy. In 2024, the U.S. exported more than $26 billion of American grains. In just my home state of Pennsylvania alone, almost $100 million of corn and barley are exported every year. These exports make a difference to the bottom line for family farmers and in Pennsylvania and across our country. American agriculture has certainly changed since 1916, and the Grain Standards Act continues to evolve with the times. The 2025 reauthorization of the Act includes key improvements that will help grain standards continue to modernize while emphasizing cost-effectiveness from both government and industry. This legislation promotes technological innovation by advancing grain grading tools to improve accuracy, efficiency, and consistency while giving USDA the flexibility to invest in critical technological upgrades. Annual reports on technological challenges and solutions ensure Congress remains informed and transparency is maintained. This bill will improve long-term financial management by allowing user fees to be deposited into interest-bearing trust funds. It also grants the Secretary authority to permit domestic grain inspection at export ports, facilitating faster, more flexible service where needed. And finally, it ensures advisory committee members may continue serving until replacements are appointed, preserving expertise and continuity. While much of the Act is permanently authorized, such as mandatory inspection and weighing of exported grain, there are important provisions set to expire at the end of this month. A lapse in authorization would disrupt the current grain inspection and weighing process, cost the farm economy more than $70 million a day, and create serious consequences for American family farms, our supply chain, and our international trading partners. These disruptions are entirely avoidable. We are doing our farmers and export partners a disservice if we don't do our jobs and get this critical piece of legislation across the finish line. I hope you will join me in voting yes for the reauthorization of the United States Grain Standards Act of 2025, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Woman from Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd like to thank Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Craig, and General Farm Commodities Risk Management and Credit Subcommittee Chairman Scott for their leadership on this bipartisan bill. The United States Grain Standards Reauthorization Act of 2025 strengthens the United States Department of Agriculture's ability to improve grain grading technologies through flexibilities to pursue modernization. Using new technologies to improve grain grading is an opportunity to make the process more accurate, efficient, and consistent. Additionally, the bill reauthorizes key USDA authorities for the grain inspection and grading system and clarifies existing laws. Reauthorizing the U.S. Grain Standards Act is critical for farmers and for the rest of the agricultural supply chain. The inspections provided by the Federal Grain Inspection Service define and classify grains, as well as assign grades to specify weight and quality requirements. These inspections provide a gold standard assurance backed by the U.S. federal government to both grain buyers and grain sellers. I proudly represent Kansas, often called the wheat state, where agriculture plays a critical role in our state's economy. Kansas farmers feed not just the nation, but the entire world. In 2023 alone, Kansas farmers exported $5.2 billion in agricultural products around the world. Grain farmers in Kansas and across the country participate in a very competitive global market. Foreign grain buyers should be confident in the process we have in place to ensure that our exports are adequately inspected. The bipartisan U.S. Grain Standards Reauthorization Act of 2025 is critical for the global grain trade. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. From Pennsylvania.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the gentlelady from the wheat state for her leadership on the Agriculture Committee and on this topic in particular. Now, Mr. Speaker, yield to the gentleman from Georgia, the chairman of the General Farm Commodities Risk Management and Credit Subcommittee, and vice chair of the full Agriculture Committee, Mr. Scott, for 4 minutes.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of H.R. 4550, the United States Grain Standards Reauthorization Act of 2025. This legislation reauthorizes the United States Grain Standards Act, a cornerstone of American agriculture and trade for nearly a century. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to go any further without first thanking Chair G.T. Thompson for his work, Ranking Member Craig for his work, and Ms. Davids for her work on this piece of legislation. As chairman of the General Farm Commodities Risk Management and Credit Subcommittee, I too have seen firsthand the importance of this law. Earlier this year, we held hearings with the industry stakeholders to discuss the Act's significance and explore ways to foster innovation. The provisions in this bill ensure transparency, market confidence, and fair price discovery, all of which are essential to a functioning agricultural market. H.R. 4550 not only reauthorizes this critical legislation, but also advances grain grading technology to modernize inspection and weighing services. These updates will help the industry adopt new technologies, improve the accuracy and the efficiency of grain standards, and keep American agriculture competitive in a global market. Allowing this law's authority to lapse would have severe consequences, costing our farm economy over $70 million a day, disrupting supply chains and international trade partnerships. Exports of grain and grain products in my home state of Georgia contribute over $900 million annually in economic output. And the United States exports over $26 billion of grain on an annual basis. These numbers underscore the need for uninterrupted, reliable, and cost-effective inspection services. H.R. 4550 protects these essential services and helps maintain the United States' reputation as the global standard in grain production. I was proud to work with Ranking Member Davids on the General Farm Committee's Risk Management and Credit Subcommittee to hold a hearing that laid the groundwork for this reauthorization, and I'm proud to support this bipartisan legislation. I urge my colleagues to support its final passage. With that, I yield the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields.
And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Lady from Kansas.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers at the moment and continue to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. One from
Mr.
Pennsylvania.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I have no additional speakers as well at this moment, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Kansas.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to once again thank Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Craig, and Chairman Scott for their work on this bipartisan bill. As a member of the House Agriculture Committee, I have made it a priority to support family farmers and strengthen our supply chains because I know how vital they are to rural economies, to our global competitiveness, and to grocery costs. To that end, the United States Grain Standards Reauthorization Act of 2025 is so important to ensuring the continuity and strength of our grain grading and inspection system. This is critical to farmers in Kansas and folks in the grain industry across the country. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bipartisan bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Well, Mr. Speaker, once again, I want to thank the gentlelady from Kansas for her passionate work on behalf of America's #1 industry, agriculture, and on this specific piece of legislation. I want to thank my good friend from Georgia, Mr. Austin Scott, for his leadership as subcommittee chair with the area of jurisdiction from which this bill comes. And, Mr. Speaker, it's not too often we have the opportunity to take a piece of legislation that is over 100 years old in its origin and to modernize it into the 21st century. And that's what we've done with the technological advancements, the transparency, and I'm very proud of the work that our Agriculture Committee has done, and I certainly would encourage a yes vote on this piece of legislation. And with that, I yield back to the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4550? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2591 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 199, H.R. 2591, a bill to require the Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration to revise regulations for certain individuals carrying out aviation activities who disclose a mental health diagnosis or condition and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Barrett, and the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Figueres, will control 20 minutes each. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record on H.R. 2591 as amended.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of H.R. 2591, the Mental Health Aviation Act. I'd like to thank Mr. Caston, Mr. Stauber, Ranking Member Larson, and Mr. Mann for their work on this legislation and leadership on this important issue. 1 in 4 Americans today deal with mental health challenges over the course of their lifetime. We need to help make sure pilots get the help they need and still keep flying. This legislation is intended to reduce the barriers preventing pilots, air traffic controllers, and other aviation professionals from reporting and seeking mental health care. The bill builds on the bipartisan work of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee from last Congress to hold the Federal Aviation Administration accountable to Congress and the Aeronautical Innovation and Modernization Working Group that we created in the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. Additionally, H.R. 2591 requires the FAA to annually review the process of mental health-related special issuances for pilots and air traffic controllers and strengthen the hiring of medical examiners to clear the backlog of special issuance requests. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this legislation and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I, too, rise in support of H.R. 2591, the Mental Health and Aviation Act, a bill that would modernize the Federal Aviation Administration's outdated policies and remove barriers to life-saving mental health care for the aviation workforce. As we continue to navigate the aftermath of tragic aviation accidents and harrowing near misses across this country, we must support the mental health of the dedicated women and men on the front lines of ensuring that the traveling public reaches their final destination safely. For far too long, many aviation professionals suffer in silence, and that's in silence because of the fear that disclosing a mental health diagnosis or treatment could derail their careers, possibly ending it. Many of us in Congress have heard from our constituents about the FAA's difficult aeromedical process, spoken to overworked air traffic controllers about the consequences of mounting job pressures, and we have seen qualified airline pilots grounded for months, in some cases even years, due to delays with FAA medical clearance reviews. With the 2024 FAA reauthorization as a blueprint, the Mental Health and Aviation Act will do several things. This will direct the FAA to annually review and update its mental health-related policies for pilots and air traffic controllers in consultation with key stakeholders. It requires the agency to implement recommendations from the Aviation Workforce Mental Health Task Group established under the 2024 FAA reauthorization. This will robustly make significant investments in the FAA's recruitment and training of aviation medical examiners, particularly those with mental health expertise. And finally, this legislation will establish a public information campaign to help destigmatize mental health in U.S. aviation, among other key reforms. The FAA's mental health protocols must evolve. They must evolve to foster an environment where the aviation workforce feels supported, to seek the resources and care that they need. And the Mental Health and Aviation Act would do just that. I would like to thank Representatives Caston, Stauber, and Mann for their leadership on this, as well as their staff for their hard work on this important issue. H.R. 2591 was unanimously approved in the T&I Committee in June, and it is endorsed by several key stakeholders, including U.S. airlines, air traffic controllers and pilots unions, the general aviation and business aviation industries, first responders, and many others. I encourage my colleagues to join us to support H.R. 2591 and urge the Senate to swiftly take up this bill to help provide the resources our aviation workforce desperately needs and deserves. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield to Mr. Stauber of Minnesota for 5 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Currently, pilots and air traffic controllers who seek mental health care are unfairly penalized, while aviation professionals are mandated to report if they seek mental health care. Once they take that step, they are faced with delays, confusion, and broad regulations to return to work. This often means that relatively minor mental health concerns result in long wait times and derailed careers for safe and well-trained pilots and air traffic controllers. If we don't change how we handle mental health in aviation, we will exacerbate a culture of silence. When I was a law enforcement officer, we too faced a culture of silence. During a shift, you would see the worst of humanity. And then you went home to your loved ones and pretended everything was okay, because if you didn't, you thought you'd come off as weak or unable to handle the job. As a former police officer who required professional help after a specific call for service, I understand the importance of seeking help. It is not a sign of weakness. Like our law enforcement officers, our pilots and air traffic controllers cannot fear that their livelihoods are at stake for taking care of themselves. These efforts are what keeps skies safe in the first place. In December of 2023, the FAA recognized the need to reform its current policies and establish the Mental Health and Aviation Medical Clearance Aviation Rulemaking Committee, or ARC, to identify barriers to mental health care for aviators and present recommendations to the FAA to address these challenges. The implementation of these recommendations was directed in Section 411 of the FAA Reauthorization Bill we passed last year. Unfortunately, there was no required timeline for implementation, which is why I've introduced legislation with Congressman Caston, the Mental Health and Aviation Act, to ensure the timely implementation of Section 411. We want our pilots to be at the top of their game, and taking care of their mental health is critical to achieving that goal. I want to personally thank my colleague and friend, Representative Caston from Illinois, for his tremendous and strong leadership on this piece of legislation. I ask all my colleagues to join me in supporting this legislation, and I yield back.
Yields back. Man from Michigan.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to yield 3 minutes to my colleague, representative from Illinois, Mr. Caston.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the Bipartisan Mental Health and Aviation Act, which I introduced with my friend, Mr. Stauber from Minnesota. I want to thank Congressman Stauber, as well as Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, for all their support and close collaboration on this bill. Today, pilots and air traffic controllers who seek mental health care are unfairly penalized by a system that perpetuates a culture of silence. Current regulations mandate that if they seek care, they are immediately grounded for a minimum of 6 months, and then are still faced with delays, confusion, and overbroad regulation in the process of returning to work. This often leaves the folks who are tasked with keeping our skies safe with an absolutely terrible choice. Do you get help, but put your career and your paycheck on hold, or do you keep your career on track and just hope you'll get better? This doesn't make our skies safer, but it does lead to horrible and avoidable tragedies. It's hit home for me when a Chicago family told me about their son who was studying to become a pilot, and he took his own life. He knew that he needed help, but he didn't want to be grounded. That young man would still be here today, but for these regulations that gave him fear when he needed care. Since working on this bill, I've heard too many nearly identical stories from pilots, from students studying to be pilots, from air traffic controllers, their coworkers, their families. As many have mentioned, in December 2023, the FAA finally recognized the need to reform those current policies and established a committee to identify barriers to mental health care for aviators, present ways for the FAA to address those challenges. The recommendations included limiting disclosure requirements for low-risk psychotherapy and expanding the use of existing peer support programs, but didn't mandate those changes, nor did it provide necessary implementation resources. This bill finishes that job by requiring the FAA to implement those changes within 2 years, to regularly review and improve processes related to mental health, and to ensure the FAA can successfully implement and publicize those rules. This will destigmatize mental health care to make our pilots healthier and our skies safer. I'm proud this legislation is widely supported, bipartisan in Congress, also by the aviation community, airlines, pilots unions, and air traffic controllers. I urge my colleagues to support and yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers and am prepared to close. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama.
In closing, I support the Mental Health and Aviation Act, and I recommend my colleagues do the same. This is an important piece of legislation that will work to better the lives and better the safety of our aerospace professionals. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mental health issues are often underreported Many times, those who do not report an issue face difficulty accessing care because of burdensome regulations and lengthy wait times for aviation professionals to return back to work. H.R. 2591 encourages and enables aviation professionals to report and access critical mental health care. Additionally, this bill will strengthen the FAA's hiring of medical examiners to help clear the backlog of special issuance requests. As you heard today, this bill will keep pilots flying, air traffic controllers working, and our airspace safe while getting people help that they need. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this bill and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2591 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3055 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 200, H.R. 3055, a bill to direct the Secretary of Transportation to develop an action plan on members of the armed forces eligible for pre-separation counseling and veterans becoming supply chain employees and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Barrett, and the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Figures, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record on H.R. 3055 as amended.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to support my bill, H.R. 3055, the Transport Jobs Act. This bill was introduced to address common barriers that veterans and members of the armed forces face when transitioning to civilian occupations. The bill requires the creation of a veteran to supply chain employee action plan, which will identify and match the skills, knowledge, and abilities of veterans and members of the armed forces with supply chain jobs. We've all seen issues within the supply chain of unfilled jobs that are critical for the delivery of the ever-important goods and services moving throughout our economy, and veterans who move home after their service looking for employment opportunities. The Secretary of Transportation will develop the action plan in consultation with the Secretaries of Defense, Veteran Affairs, and Labor. This bill provides veterans and those soon to be discharged from the armed services with the support that they deserve and addresses the continued labor shortages in our nation's critical supply chains. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this legislation and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support, too, of the Transitioning, Retiring, and New Service Members to Port, Ocean, Rail, and Truck Jobs Act, as amended, which was introduced by my colleagues, Representatives Barrett, Scholten, and Bost. This legislation requires the Secretary of Transportation to develop an action plan that identifies supply chain job needs at ports, railroads, and trucking companies in consultation with the Secretaries of Defense, Veterans Affairs, and Labor. Veterans are trained for hard and dedicated work. I understand why supply chain employees want to hire more veterans. And one of the lightest lifts that we can do in this body is to ensure that we are exhausting every possible resource that we can to ensure that those who have signed up to risk their lives for this country can find employment when they leave serving the armed services. It will be helpful for veterans to know about additional job opportunities at ports and railroads and with trucking companies. Many of these jobs are solid, middle-class, family-supporting union jobs. They require an understanding of the safety, sensitive nature of the work that tends to be particularly well-suited to the training military veterans have received. I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers and I'm prepared to close. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I support the Transport Act as amended to provide options for veterans during pre-separation counseling, and I recommend my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleagues, or rather my colleague, Ms. Scholten, for introducing this legislation with me in support of our nation's servicemen and women. I was glad the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure favorably reported this measure and look forward to the House passing this legislation. H.R. 3055 is one small step that we can take to ensure we provide our service members with the resources they need as they transition back to the civilian workforce, many of whom may have never worked in the civilian workforce before joining the military. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record letter exchanges between the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and the Veteran Affairs Committee, and the Armed Services Committee.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this bill and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3055 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3423 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 194, H.R. 3423, a bill to amend Title 49 United States Code to include aircraft de-icing storage facilities and the definition of airport development and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Barrett, and the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Figures, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record on H.R. 3423 as amended.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to rise in support of H.R. 3423, the Facility for Runway Operations and Safe Transportation Act, which will allow storage facilities for aircraft de-icing fluids and equipment to be acquired through the Airport Improvement Program, AIP funds. Under the current structure, AIP funds can be used to acquire aircraft de-icing equipment, yet when it comes to the storage facilities that house that very same equipment, airports are forced to utilize alternative and less reliable funding mechanisms. If you can use AIP funds to purchase the equipment, you should be able to use those same funding mechanisms to acquire the necessary facilities to house and protect the equipment. I would like to thank Mr. Weed for his leadership on this common sense piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of the legislation and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support also of H.R. 3423, the Facility for Runway Operations and Safe Transportation Act, the FROST Act, a bill that would make it easier for U.S. airports to store certain critical safety equipment. I want to thank Representative Weed for introducing this bipartisan bill, as well as his Democratic co-sponsors, Representative Skolton and Representative Gillen. De-icing an aircraft is a vital part to maintaining safe flight operations, particularly during takeoff. As ice and snow accumulate on an aircraft's surface, particularly its wings, it can make the aircraft much harder to control and fly. That's why operators are federally mandated to use de-icing equipment when ice and snow accumulates to ensure that the plane can be operated safely. This equipment is so important that improper use has been cited by the National Transportation Safety Board, or failure to have it at all, as a cause of multiple aviation accidents, including a very famous one right here in the Potomac River for a flight that took off in 1982 from Ronald Reagan. Moreover, with climate change contributing to more extreme weather across the country, de-icing fluids and equipment have become even more of a necessity. The ability for airports to store this equipment on their AIP funding, the Airport Improvement Program funding, towards aircraft de-icing equipment and structures, but not the storage of the facilities that house that equipment. It is almost comical, but this is a serious issue and something that we have to resolve. It is a common sense piece that we have gotten together in a bipartisan way here to address. H.R. 3423 would address this oversight by clarifying that airports can use AIP funds on storage facilities for aircraft de-icing equipment and fluids. Bolstering airports' ability to enhance aviation safety is a common sense solution that we should all support. Thank you to Representative Weed, Representative Skolton, and Representative Gillen for sponsoring this important bipartisan bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 5 minutes to my friend from Wisconsin who knows a little bit about snow and ice, Mr. Weed.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3423 or the FROST Act.
Recognized.
I ask for unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 3423, the bill now under consideration. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 3423, the Facility for Runway Operations and Safe Transportation Act, or the FROST Act. This bipartisan legislation makes a simple but critical update to Title 49 of the United States Code by including aircraft de-icing storage facilities in the definition of airport development. In cold weather states like Wisconsin and many others across the country, safe and efficient de-icing operations are essential to keeping passengers, crews, and cargo moving during winter months. Aircraft are uniquely sensitive to any amount of ice and snow that accumulates on the airframe, causing irregularities that add weight, interrupt airflow, and can come loose during flight, potentially damaging critical flight systems. By clarifying that these storage facilities qualify for federal aircraft improvement funding, the FROST Act empowers airports to invest in infrastructure that protects lives and strengthens regional economies. This bill reflects a shared commitment to aviation safety and practical governance. It has support from both sides of the aisle and has been favorably reported by the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers and I'm prepared to close. I reserve.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I support 3423, the FROST Act, and I urge my colleagues to do the same with this common sense piece of legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Aircraft de-icing equipment is critical, as we all know, for ensuring the safe aircraft operations and the ability to maintain aircraft performance during colder months and during inclement circumstances. The Airport Improvement Program was established to fund essential airport infrastructure projects that enhance safety and mitigate issues that cold weather can bring. H.R. 3423 is simple, yet effective, and ensures storage facilities for aircraft de-icing fluids and equipment can be acquired with the Airport Improvement Program funds. I took a tour of an airport in my district not long ago, and this very issue came up as a frustration they were facing. As such, I'm proud to support this common sense piece of legislation, and I urge support of this bill and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3423 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3424.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 195, H.R. 3424, a bill to require the Administrator of the General Services Administration to collaborate with federal tenants with respect to shared space arrangements and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Barrett, and the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Figures, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record on H.R. 3424.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 3424, the Shared Property Agency Collaboration and Engagement Act of 2025, or SPACE Act, directs the Administrator of the Government Services Administration, the GSA, to work with federal tenants to develop a criteria that facilitates the expanded use of space sharing or co-locating. This legislation also directs the GSA Administrator to establish measurable objectives to quantify the success of the shared space framework. The SPACE Act achieves this by building upon the important public building reforms that the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee made last Congress in the Thomas R. Carper Water Resources Development Act of 2024. I want to thank the gentleman from Missouri, Representative Onder, for his leadership on this bipartisan legislation. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this legislation and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I support H.R. 3424, the Shared Property Agency Collaboration and Engagement Act, the SPACE Act. This bill requires the administration of the GSA to develop new criteria to help expand the use of office space sharing for federal agencies. By sharing amenities and space and services, federal agencies can use shared space arrangements to make the most effective use of government-owned real estate. This is about efficiency. A pilot program conducted by GSA allowed 6 offices across the country to provide ready-to-use spaces conducive to cross-government collaboration while saving taxpayer dollars by reducing operational costs for federal agencies. This legislation will allow GSA to expand on these efforts by establishing standards for shared office spaces and measuring the success of this initiative. I support this bill to ensure that we are good stewards of taxpayer funding when it comes to federal real estate and encourage all members to do the same. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Onder of Missouri.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to speak today in support of my bill, H.R. 3424, the Shared Property Agency Collaboration and Engagement Act, or SPACE Act. I'm grateful to Congressman Chris Pappas for co-leading this bipartisan effort to bring greater efficiency and accountability to federal government real estate decisions. The GSA currently manages more than 8,300 owned and leased assets, totaling over 363 million square feet. Yet many of these facilities are underused, duplicative, or poorly maintained. Agencies often operate in silos. One agency leases new office space while another has empty square footage in the same city. There is no coordinated system to ensure agencies share space or consolidate operations when possible. And that lack of communication leads to wasted taxpayer dollars. This is why the SPACE Act directs the administrator of the GSA to identify barriers to federal agencies sharing space in federally owned or leased buildings, and to develop solutions to overcome those barriers. This includes examining logistical, legal, regulatory, or cultural hurdles that prevent our agencies from entering into shared use agreements, even when that would save money and improve efficiency. Once the administrator completes this review, the GSA will report its findings and recommendations to the relevant committees of jurisdiction in both the House and Senate. This is a fiscally responsible, good government reform. It doesn't grow government, it makes existing government work smarter. We shouldn't be asking taxpayers to fund more buildings when the federal government already has plenty of space that is being mismanaged or ignored. The SPACE Act promotes better use of what we already own, reducing waste and protecting taxpayer dollars. This is not a new idea. The GAO, the Public Buildings Reform Board, and numerous oversight bodies have repeatedly recommended this kind of interagency coordination to reduce costs and improve property management. The SPACE Act puts those recommendations into action and establishes a clear process to identify opportunities and deliver results. Again, I want to thank Congressman Pappas for working with me on this legislation. This is the kind of common sense bipartisan approach that shows we can work together to fix real problems without adding bureaucracy or spending more money. The SPACE Act is about accountability and stewardship. It says to federal agencies, before you ask for more, use what you already have and work with your neighbors to do it. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support H.R. 3424 and help us to move this important reform forward today. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no more speakers, and I'm prepared to close. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support H.R. 3424, the SPACE Act, and encourage my colleagues to do the same. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. In closing, this legislation will help improve the federal government's use of shared space and save taxpayer dollars. By building on the success of the last Congress, we can continue to implement policies that ensure we are good stewards for our taxpayer resources and hold agencies accountable for the effective and efficient use of our federal real estate portfolio. With that, I urge support of H.R. 3424. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3424? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair,
Mr. Speaker, I demand the yeas and nays.
two-thirds being in the affirmative. For what purposes does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise or remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3425 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 196, H.R. 3425, a bill to direct the Director of the Federal Protective Service to establish processes to strengthen oversight, performance, and accountability of contract security personnel engaged in the protection of certain buildings and grounds, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Barrett, and the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Figures, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record on H.R. 3425 as amended.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 3425, the Post Act of 2025, strengthens the Federal Protective Service, or FPS, and their ability to secure federal facilities and improve accountability for the contract guards who protect them. The Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure has conducted bipartisan oversight of FPS operations and federal facility security. Both testimony at hearings and Government Accountability Office reports have reinforced the need for these reforms. The Federal Protective Service is tasked with securing approximately 9,000 GSA leased and owned facilities across America. To protect these buildings, FPS oversees over 15,000 contracted guards known as protective security officers. Despite the size and importance of the service's mission, serious vulnerabilities exist in its oversight of contract guards. For example, one GAO investigation found that contracted guards failed to detect a concealed weapon, including batons and pepper spray, in half of covert security tests. While FPS uses covert testing to assess security vulnerabilities, they lack a standardized system to track, analyze, and respond to the results. The Post Act addresses this critical gap by requiring the FPS director to establish and maintain a centralized database to capture covert test data, including why a contract guard failed to detect contraband. The legislation mandates quarterly analysis of this data to identify trends and training needs and requires targeted corrective training for guards who fail covert tests, helping close performance gaps and improve public safety. This is a common-sense reform that turns the tests FPS is already conducting into data that can drive actionable improvements, making federal buildings safer for employees and the American people that we serve. The Post Act also tackles another persistent problem, FPS's broken shift tracking system. In 2018, FPS launched the Post Tracking System to modernize its paper-based guard sign-in process. 7 years later, the Post Tracking System remains unreliable, and FPS still relies on paper records. As a result, FPS has been unable to issue timely notifications to tenant agencies about guard shortages. In some cases, this even forced the closure of a federal building to the public. The Post Act would require FPS to either fix PTS or replace it with a modern, dependable solution. H.R. 3425 contains practical measures to improve FPS's oversight of contract guards, strengthen accountability, and improve safety at federal buildings. I want to thank the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Kennedy, for his leadership on this legislation, and the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Figures, for working on this bipartisan bill. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this legislation and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of H.R. 3425, the Personnel Oversight and Shift Tracking Act of 2025, a bill that I am proud to co-sponsor. This bill would require the director of the FPS, the Federal Protective Service, to establish processes to strengthen oversight, performance, and accountability of contract security personnel engaged in the protection of federal buildings and grounds that are owned, occupied, or secured by GSA. FPS law enforcement officers and the contract guards that support them risk their lives every day to protect federal workers and the public by controlling access to government facilities and screening visitors for prohibited items. As part of these efforts, FPS investigators have covertly tested security at federal buildings to ensure the accuracy of these systems and have developed a tracking system to ensure guards are qualified and posts are staffed adequately. Despite these efforts, however, guards failed to detect prohibited items in about half of the 27 covert tests that the Government Accountability Office investigators conducted just last year. Additionally, the new FPS tracking system has not worked well enough to replace the old paper-based system, as my colleague has just described. By improving FPS data collection and analysis and implementing the findings on these security tests, the agency will be able to better ensure the safety and security of federal buildings, employees, the public, and the FPS officers themselves. I support this legislation and urge all members to do the same to make sure that we are holding our contractors accountable and doing everything we can to protect our federal buildings and our personnel located within. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Kennedy of Utah.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of my bill, H.R. 3425, the Personnel Oversight and Shift Tracking Act of 2025, or the POST Act, and I thank Mr. Barrett and Mr. Figures for their support of this really important bill. This is a common sense bill that fixes a broken system and restores accountability within the Federal Protective Service. The Federal Protective Service, or FPS, is responsible for protecting nearly 9,000 federal facilities nationwide. In fiscal years 2024, FPS operated with a $2.2 billion budget and oversaw more than 15,000 contract protective services officers. With that level of funding and manpower, taxpayers expect reliable results. Unfortunately, that's not what they are getting. A recent JAO investigation showed contract guards failed to detect banned items like batons and pepper spray in half of all covert tests. That is unacceptable, and it should never have been allowed to persist. It is also preventable. H.R. 3425 makes sure FPS reviews these failures, documents them, identifies the root causes, and then takes corrective action. This bill also addresses the embarrassing state of FPS's post-tracking system. Back in 2018, FPS promised to modernize guard sign-in with a digital system. Years later, that system still doesn't work, and the agency is still relying on paper as its official record. That means Washington can't even confirm in real time whether a building is staffed and secure. In some cases, buildings have had to close because of it. That is a waste of money and a failure of leadership. H.R. 3425 fixes this by giving FPS 6 months to either make the system work or replace it with one that does. Mr. Speaker, this is not complicated. When Americans walk into a federal building, they deserve to know it's staffed and secure. The American people expect their government to meet basic duties. The POST Act honors that expectation by restoring accountability and requiring results. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 3425, the POST Act, so that we restore proper oversight and accountability in the Federal Protective Service and protect taxpayers from waste and failure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no more speakers and I'm prepared to close. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I support H.R. 3425 and want to thank my colleague, Mr. Kennedy, for his leadership on this important matter. The POST Act of 2025 is something that I urge all my colleagues to support, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In closing, H.R. 3425 as amended strengthens oversight of the Federal Protective Service's Contract Guard program and ensures protective security officers are properly trained and accountable. Additionally and importantly, this legislation modernizes critical systems to make federal buildings safer for employees and the public. With that, I urge support of H.R. 3425 as amended, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 3425, as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, for what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3428.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 198, H.R. 3428, a bill to require the Comptroller General of the United States to conduct a review of the Mid-Atlantic River Basin Commissions and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Barrett, and the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Figures, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record on H.R. 3428.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to commend my colleague, Congressman Bresnahan, for his hard work on this bill. The Mid-Atlantic River Basin Commissions for the Susquehanna, Delaware, and Potomac Rivers came into existence before the creation of the EPA and mandated federal involvement in the commissions. H.R. 3428 is a good government bill that directs the GAO to review the ethics, practices, funding, and federal responsibilities of the commissions. Congress has a duty to conduct oversight of these commissions, and I thank Mr. Bresnahan for ensuring that we fulfill that role. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this legislation and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3428, a bill to direct the GAO to review the 3 Mid-Atlantic River Basin Commissions and report on the practices and federal responsibilities of each commission. The Mid-Atlantic River Basin Commissions serve an important role in the region by managing, protecting, and improving their respective river basins. The commissions were created to consolidate a complex web of state, interstate, and federal efforts into one. For example, the history of the Potomac Basin Commission reminds us how the commission was formed in response to extreme pollution levels to our nation's river that required a regional cooperative response by all jurisdictions. Similarly, the Delaware River Basin Compact, signed in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy and then governors of Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York, created a commission with the force of law to oversee a unified approach to managing the river without regard to political boundaries. As a result of these commissions, water quality on the Delaware, Potomac, and Susquehanna rivers have in many ways vastly improved. But threats such as population increases, land use changes, and the growth of impervious surface, chemical contaminants, and nutrient and sediment enrichment still require focused regional attention. This GAO study will review these partnerships and how responsibilities are split between the commissions and the federal agencies, as well as examine the transparency and communication practices of the commissions. I support H.R. 3428 and urge my colleagues to do the same. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Bresnahan of Pennsylvania.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to introduce H.R. 3428, the Mid-Atlantic River Basin Commission Review Act. This legislation will bring much-needed oversight and clarity to the activities and funding streams for the Delaware River Basin Commission, Susquehanna River Basin Commission, the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin. The River Basin Commissions in the Mid-Atlantic work across state lines to regulate the river systems within a watershed. Since their inceptions after World War II, the rivers they manage have grown in importance as our populations have grown and the water usage has increased. Millions of people rely on these rivers for water and wastewater needs, including my constituents in Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District. These commissions also play a role in protecting rivers from pollution and ensuring the ecosystems remain vibrant and resilient. As the roles have grown, Congress has not always had insight into the exact responsibility and tasks the River Basin Commissions are undertaking. My legislation directs the Government Accountability Office to conduct a study and compile recommendations for the Mid-Atlantic River Basin Commissions to ensure they have proper ethics policies in place, conduct an inventory of the federal responsibilities, and look to see if any of their responsibilities have become duplicative since their inceptions. My legislation then directs these River Basin Commissions to report back annually on how they are complying with these recommendations. GAO is the gold standard for federal reports and has conducted numerous reports and studies of government agencies. In fact, according to the GAO, 75% of the recommendations are implemented over a 4-year period. I trust these proper oversights will help these River Basin Commissions find ways to improve their services to their citizens and the rivers they serve. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense legislation. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers, and I'm prepared to close. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I support H.R. 3428 and want to thank my colleague from Pennsylvania for his leadership on this issue, and I urge my colleagues to do the same in supporting this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 3428, the Mid-Atlantic River Basin Commission Review Act, is legislation that will ensure important rivers in our communities are with proper oversight and taxpayer resources are carried out in their missions responsibly. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this bill and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3428? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.